What happens when an engineer decides to stop building someone else's dream and start building their own? My guest today is Mark Sproul, an engineer turned co-founder who built a robotics company from the ground up. And he's here to talk about what the leap really looked like. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the 20-Minute Career.
Thanks, Jane. Great to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here. Your career is quite fascinating, and I think that it's something that many students and people in general would be really interested to hear about. You're an engineer. Let's go back to the beginning of your career and let's talk it through.
Yeah, cool. I would define myself as an engineer, although my career has certainly diversified. The concept of what an engineer is very broad. When I was at school, I certainly had no idea what an engineer was, but lots of people were telling me that maybe engineering was a pathway that I should follow because I had a strong interest in building and creating things. So as a kid, I was introduced to sailing from my grandfather, actually, sailing on an old wooden boat, which needed lots of maintenance and love and affection. Yeah. And lots of problem solving, not just from the maintenance perspective, but also from the actual sailing. Things fail and break and you've got to figure yourself out of those scenarios. I think as a kid, I sort of started to have this interest in, okay, how do things work? How can you fix things? How can you improve things? And that transgressed into me buying some old boats on Facebook Marketplace. Wow. One of my famous ones was an old catamaran that my housemate bought and left in the backyard and didn't do anything with. And I found that an awesome project to start to restore this boat. Still at this point, I didn't understand how that related to engineering. I slowly realized that, engineering is about taking an incredibly complex system, take a catamaran or an engine and starting to resolve that problem into smaller problems that you can actually start to overcome. And so that concept of taking something complex and dividing it up into small subsets of problems and then solving each of those problems and seeing how that works as a system, made me really interested in the concept. So from there, I left school and I started engineering, doing a biomedical engineering with medical science degree. I didn't do a lot of forward thinking about what I was going to choose to do. I think the big influences for me at that time was one of my best friends at school. He went off and did medicine. And I think that's influenced me to choose medical science and biomedical engineering. So I latched onto some of those concepts, but then combined that with the advice of, you really like sailing, you like restoring boats, perhaps engineering would be a pathway that is not directly related to your hobby, but adjacent to it and uses the same skills that you're working on. Yeah. So I left university and I was fortunate enough to enter into the graduate program at ResMed, which is a sleep apnea device company. I was pursuing a technical stream of work there, which I absolutely loved. One of my first weeks going there, entering the prototyping lab, where they've got 3D printers and CNC machines and injection molding machines. It's in that place that you get to realize the designs that you've modeled on the computer. And that was an incredibly exciting opportunity to be given a workspace to use your hands. That really resonated with me. But I think after about 4 years, I realized that when you're working in such a large organization, producing incredibly important products for society and community, but you are a very small cog in a very large machine. And I think for me personally, I wanted to understand what does it look like when you're a large cog in a much smaller machine? And so I think that generally was what drove me to join one of my university friends who had developed an idea for developing robotics, a robotics company from scratch. The idea of being able to join a 2-person team, half of the machine effectively, and see what that looks like was incredibly motivating.
Yeah, and it's very exciting, I guess, the idea of building something yourself, especially if you're an engineer.
Yeah, building something yourself and also looking at, okay, there's the building part of it. So building the product, designing the product, but then there's also all the other elements that come to business. So once you've built a product, how do you go out and market that product? How do you find your customers? Once you find your customers, how do you arrange that relationship with them? And then once you've got a product and customers, how do you produce that in a reliable way? So there's so many other elements that come into shipping a product. which are fascinating. And it's great for me personally, to get an insight into those different elements. And that, I think we started the conversation talking about I'm an engineer. And I think I defined an engineer as someone who's able to take complex problems and solve them in small pieces. And I think for me, that applies to all those departments.
Absolutely.
So really good operators in marketing have potentially a very engineering approach. They have to be very creative. They have to solve very complex problems.
So Reach Robotics, for people that haven't heard about what it is, in sort of 60, 90 seconds, do you want to give a really quick recap of what it is that you and your co-founder built?
Yeah, so we were building a very niche product, which was developing small robotic arms for drones of the sea. So you can imagine everyone's seen drones of the sky, but there's also the equivalent underwater. Instead of using propellers, you're using thrusters. And these are unmanned, unhumaned machines that are assisting operations underwater. So that could be for defense. So, for example, when they have mines underwater that they need to defuse, there's obviously a preference to send robots down rather than humans to try and disarm those threats. For offshore infrastructure, like that's used in oil and gas, so you can imagine offshore rigs, they have to constantly monitor the subsea structures to make sure that they're not corroding faster than they thought. And so they need to send robots or humans down to monitor those pieces. So we're developing robotic arms that attach to the unmanned vehicles.
So as a co-founder of that organization, you've mentioned that not only were you involved in the engineering aspect of it, but everything else that goes towards building and growing a small business. If we think about the type of pressures you felt as co-founder, what did that tend to look like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The pressures fluctuated. So the way I've sort of distilled it in my mind is if I was to take the timeline, the first pressure you really face is the technical hurdle of you've got an idea and you need to design that product. And you don't have confidence in your team that you're able to overcome those design problems, right? There's this huge pressure. Okay, we've got this idea. We're fairly sure about the product's capability in the market, but I don't know if we're able to make this product. So that uncertainty or the lack of confidence that you can actually build something in the timescale and with the capital available. Then you overcome that hurdle. And then the hurdle is, okay, I was fairly sure that this product would be able to sell, but now I need to find customers. And now I've probably got a small team that I need to pay a salary to, and we need to find customers quickly. And so then there's the commercial, oh no, this product actually doesn't have a market. Then you overcome that problem, and then you get to the production part of it. You start producing these products, not en masse, but on a small scale, and you need to make it in a repeatable manner. And you start to have these products being used in service and they're coming back to you with faults, and customers are calling you saying that I can't proceed with my project because your product's failing on me. And so then there becomes the big concern, oh no, how do we make this in a reliable manner? And so you constantly, and this wave comes through. So then it goes back to the technical team to, okay, now we've got a product that sort of works. Are we confident we can get it to reliability? Then you meet the reliability and then the sales comes. So it's a constant whirlwind. And I don't think the pressure ever fades. The stakes just get a little bit higher. And then another important element that I haven't spoken about is the team. And I think a lot of late career people will say this, that the job itself is not too hard. It's complicated, but it's not complex. Where the complexity comes in is working with lots of people, lots of different personalities, lots of different motivations, and that's an incredibly exciting problem though, that everyone experiences, no matter what your career is.
As Reach Robotics grew, you got capital investment, and I'm guessing that you would have had pressures from your investors as well in terms of their expectation for you to deliver certain growth and so forth.
Yeah, so there's if you go down the career path of trying to start your own company, there's two approaches, and there's a spectrum of them. One of them is to get significant capital investment. Let's call that the venture capital route. And the other route is that you fund yourself. So you start developing products on a
Yeah.
very low budget, and you start to sell that product, and you start to use the revenue from that product to invest back into the business. And we sort of took a middle approach where we had some angel investment from one investor who was quite passive and would come and visit our office every 6 months. But the pressure from him was not significant. For us, it was more pressure internally of we've committed to this idea,
Yeah.
and we haven't yet proven ourselves, and the pressure of failure maybe was more of a pressure for ourselves than the pressure from external. So it came from within, really, which is perhaps for me was quite empowering, like that intrinsic motivation versus an
Mm.
extrinsic motivation. So, but yeah, like if I was to be very tangible, I think the greatest pressure for me, which would keep me up at night, was how do I make payroll each month?
Yeah.
And if we're not able to make ends meet by the end of the month,
There's a
what are we
problem.
going to do, right? And that pressure really doesn't go away, because even when you're doing very well, you're investing back into the business and trying to
Yeah.
grow it. But then the cash flow concerns come back.
There's always a price or a cost to the role, and that manifests itself in very different ways depending on the type of career that you choose. What would you say the cost of your role looked like?
I think the cost of my role is that you don't stop thinking about work.
Yeah.
So um, you've got the 9 to 5 day in the office, and you've got quite a bit of flexibility with that, right? Like you're accountable to yourself and to your team. You're not
Yeah.
necessarily accountable to a boss who has a time clock on you, right? But when you go home and you're making dinner, your mind probably goes back to thinking about the business and what's the greatest risk. And you might even go to sleep thinking about it. You'll probably wake up a couple of nights in the week with concerns. And so, yeah, the cost is it consumes, at least for myself and the way my brain works, it does consume your thoughts. Having said that, I think that means that you deeply care about what you're doing.
Absolutely. Agree.
And with care, you can create amazing things.
Yeah.
So I would sort of flip that for me. Is that a true cost? I don't think I would want to be doing something that I don't deeply care about. But balance is important, right? And so then it's how do you put in guardrails, or how do you have a team that you can talk things through? And I think that's why it's so important to have another co-founder, because at different points in time, you might be in a very stressful space, and the other person might not be, and you can come together and have some co-mentoring sessions and share your thoughts in an effective way with someone who deeply understands what you're going through as well.
Yeah. With all the sort of the achievement that you've been able to gain out of your career to date, what has made it worthwhile?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is the growth of my internal confidence. So when I started school, I was not a very confident person. I had a speech impediment when I started school, and that meant that I was like on the receiving end of a lot of bullying, which was incredibly difficult and definitely brought my confidence as a person down. Academically, I was able to do quite well at school, and also I grew quite tall as well, which meant I was quite good at basketball. So
Yeah.
I was able to achieve things at school, but my internal confidence was still very low. And then I went to university and was able to make great friendships, and was also able to do and complete the courses, which again you'd think would logically sum up to, okay, you can have confidence that you can go into the workforce. But I remember receiving my first job offer and just being thrilled that someone would accept me. Then going and developing a business, and even if it wasn't a successful business, being able to sell products, develop a product that people were willing to buy,
Yeah.
and develop systems that you could be proud of. It was the true thing that gave me internal confidence and has led me to try and start another business, which some might call arrogance. um, but yeah, I think that personal growth was incredibly important for me.
Having spoken to a few people now that have started businesses, it's the purpose inside of you, knowing that you're doing something, growing something that can really build your confidence, even though you might at times still have some self doubt. You have something to sort of say, actually, no, I'm doing something and I'm moving in the right direction.
Yeah, because that's one of the big things. Once you leave school and university,
Mm,
you no longer have quick validation loops. Like
mm,
you might have performance reviews with your manager, or you might have a teammate who sends you an email saying great work, but it's very far and few between. Whereas at university and at school, you're having exams and you're constantly getting validation for the work that you're doing. And then you start this career and you're screaming for feedback, but no one has time to give you
Yeah.
feedback, or there's just not the expectation. So yeah, I think having purpose and having something tangible that you can in your heart of hearts say, I was able to build that, and I can see the impact that I had on a product, on something that people use daily.
Yeah.
Yeah, is incredibly important for me.
20 minutes goes really fast. I want to just, if we have a little bit of time, just finish it off with a final fast five. So, what do you think has been the biggest thing that your career has taught you thus far?
The biggest thing that my career has taught me so far is at school, at university, and even during your career, everyone's talking about networking, right?
Yeah.
And actually, Jamie, we were talking about
We were
this
just
just
talking
before
about it.
we started this podcast. How important networking is. And
Yeah.
I am not someone who naturally ever gravitated towards this concept of networking. I found it incredibly daunting. But during my career, and as you start to use that muscle of communicating to people that you might be uncomfortable with communicating with, you start to realize that networking is really just about connecting with people and having fun and finding something interesting to talk about and having a conversation that you walk away from and you've learned something from. And as a result, now I've had people recently, even close friends, saying, "Oh, you're great at networking," but I really just consider it building friendships. And I truly believe that heart on heart. Like if I meet someone new, how can I find something interesting that I can learn from about that person? Or how can I share an idea that I have and see if I can grow that idea? Who else might they be connected to that might be interesting to speak to? And if you have that mindset, it's not about extracting something from them. It's about sharing something with them.
Yeah.
Then you can really grow.
That's really important. What would be one of your biggest mistakes that you learned from?
The biggest mistake that comes to mind is we were developing robotics, which were used by defense. And it was used by, they were called clearance divers who would be trying to disarm underwater explosives. And we were also developing robots that were used by oil and gas and science and academia. And I remember we had a request come through for our largest purchase order of robotic arms, and it was coming from a foreign country. And the Australian Defence Force said that if you sell to a foreign country, there was a list of countries that you need to disclose this if it's being used for a defence purpose. And I remember at the time being like, oh, well, I don't think we need to disclose this because it's being used by their coast guards. It's not being used from a defense related purpose. I had some incredible teammates, and one of my teammates put his hand up and said, I really don't agree. Like, I think we need to disclose this. We have to run a business that goes by the rules. And we agreed. We agreed with that approach. And in the end, the Australian Defence Force said, no, you cannot accept this order. It was like a game changing order for us as a business. And it was such an interesting process of seeing how easy it is for your ethics, even when you consider yourself as quite an ethical person. It's so easy to see how ethics can be bent in those scenarios. And I've come out of that experience being so grateful to have learned from that. That we talked about the importance of having purpose, but the importance of having ethics in business is equally as important. And I think I wouldn't be proud of the accomplishments if we hadn't been ethical in our way of making business.
What skill do you think is going to be really important to young people as we move into the future?
Yeah, I think it relates back to what I was talking before about connecting with people. You know, like that's the one thing that machines will never be able to do
Absolutely. Yeah.
is have an emotional connection with someone. We also spoke earlier about the complexity that comes with a team and talking and connecting with people, and how a job is complicated, but working with people is complex. And if you're able to slowly build that muscle of networking and connecting effectively with your internal team and also your customers and external team, I think that's something that will always be incredibly valuable.
What excites you about where sort of the whole engineering space is moving into the future?
Yeah, I think generally excites me is that there are a lot of challenges that we're going to face, or that my kids are going to face. The biggest challenge that comes to mind is climate change, and I think this is where engineering, technology, AI can potentially mitigate, or at least we can adapt to those new challenges. On one end, that technology is sucking energy from the planet
Yes.
and contributing to the problem. But on the other end, we can't be ignorant that we can't just stop that. But what we
Mm.
can do is try and mitigate that risk through technology. And I think there are really viable opportunities to do that.
And if you were sort of looking back at Mark as a 20-year-old, what advice would you have given yourself back then?
I, I think there's two pieces of advice I'll give that person. And I think it would be life experience is just as important as career development. So don't worry that you're enjoying life and that you're staying out late with friends and potentially missing an assignment deadline. Like, it's okay. And then the other one would be you have confidence.
Yeah.
Like, things, I think we overestimate what we can do in a year and we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. Things get built slowly. And particularly when you're young, it's frustrating how slow things move. But then when you reflect, when you've had the benefit of a 10 years and you can reflect on a career, you can be incredibly amazed by what you've done over that 10 years.
It's been great to have you, Mark. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jane. Thanks for having me.